Hello, hello. Emma here. And it's so nice to be spending a bit of time with you. And thank you for listening to this episode, which is a really cool one I'm excited about, just in time to get into this first season, because I definitely wanted to interview April Dunford, who is my guest on this episode. Now, if you haven't heard of April Dunford, she is an amazing consultant. She's the world leader in positioning. She wrote an incredible book called Obviously Awesome a few years ago, and then she followed it up with another awesome book called Sales Pitch. And she has really kind of changed the way the tech industry has thought about positioning their tech products. I came across her book, her first book, when it came out. I remember being like, oh my God, this woman is my spirit animal. The book, the way it was written, her point of view, even her sense of humor felt really similar to me. And I always had April as someone I really admired, just an incredible role model to have as another woman consultant doing really great work in tech. Now, I thought to myself, I want to write a book on messaging that's as good as her book, that's like this, like really practical, really awesome. And I kind of set out on this plan to try and land a traditional book deal. And this was like a 5-year plan. I mean, I started talking to agents, and I learned very quickly that in order to get a book deal with a reputable traditional publisher, you had to prove that you had 1 million people on your email list and massive following on Instagram. I also learned that traditional publishers don't really count LinkedIn as a social platform. Like, they don't understand followers and whether that's really going to translate to book sales. And of course, I was only on LinkedIn. And I'd even hired a coach to help me get an agent. It was seriously going to take about 10 years for a book to come out. And then I got asked to be on a panel podcast where it was me and 2 other people. And one of them was April Dunford. And I thought, oh, cool. I get to finally meet her in real life. So we did the podcast. And afterwards, I shot her an email and was just like, you're awesome. We got on a call and we started talking, and she's hilarious and very cool in real life. But I asked her, how did you write your book and who published it? She told me how she had ended up self-publishing after pursuing a traditional deal and how it wasn't really great. And she's like, hey, you should do it. You should write the book on messaging. And she connected me with her publisher, and the rest was history. And when I think about that book, so much of it comes down to the inspiration from April. She really is awesome. Her story, becoming a consultant, going from corporate and really going off on her own and owning who she is to her core, and that becoming her superpower in her own business, is such an inspiring story. And whether you are a consultant, are self-employed, or whether you're working full-time, I think there is some real gems from this conversation that I had with her, and it was a lot of fun. So I hope you enjoy this episode with April. I know I had a blast recording it. Welcome to the Emma Stratton Show. This is a podcast that's all about sharing unconventional advice that will inspire you to create a business that reflects your true self, so you can experience greater freedom and abundance in your work and life. And I'm your host, Emma. April Dunford, a revolutionary in many ways in the field of positioning, but also in the field of marketing herself as a consultant, who just told me the words that, made me jealous inside. She just said, I gave up on social media and things have never been better in my business. So let's talk about that, because I think we're all wanting to do that too, or I am at least.
I think everybody's business is different, so you got to take this with the big old grain of salt. I think if I was building a business where I was selling stuff to consultants, I would absolutely be focusing on LinkedIn, because I think there's a lot of consultants talking to consultants on LinkedIn. But the situation I'm in now is that I'm working mainly with these kind of bigger companies for the most part. Like, I still have a reasonable business of companies that are like, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 million revenue. Mm-hmm. But if you look at my Q1, which is booked pretty solid. Most of the companies are, 100 million, 200 million, or they're in the billions. And I'm working with a very senior executive. Like, let's say it's a 200 million revenue company. I'm working with the CEO. If it's a $1 billion company, I've got a senior vice president in charge of a division doing billions of revenue. Like, I don't think they're hanging out on LinkedIn. like, I don't think they're sitting there looking at the stream, and people will say, "Oh, you can't go by who interacts with your stuff." But I can ask people that call me and that I work with, and nobody ever mentions LinkedIn. Nobody ever says, "Oh, I saw your stuff on LinkedIn" or whatever. They say other things, like they read my book. A lot of people hear about me on podcasts. So I'm here on I got my own podcast, but I'm on other people's podcasts. Lots of people, I have a reasonable number of newsletter subscribers. It's not huge, but it's okay. And I think a lot of people are consuming my stuff there. And they see me at conferences to a certain extent. But again, these bigger companies, I don't think they're consuming a ton of social media in general. I don't think they're TikTokers. I was talking to a consultant a few months back, and he sells more to really early stage startups, like, startups that would be a couple million revenue, if that. And his opinion is that most of his business comes from LinkedIn. And I'm like, interesting. So maybe if that's your audience, your audience maybe is consuming a lot of stuff there. So I kind of did the test where I just backed it right off. And I'm just posting, when I feel like I got something to talk about, or I drop a podcast and I promo it there or something, but I'm not like, I'd be lucky if I get one post a week, and there's lots of weeks where I don't have any. And, so I just backed off to nothing. And again, business has never been so busy. I think I was investing more than I should have been over there, to be honest.
So here's my theory on that. And this is something that I was taught by a mentor and something that I try to practice in my business, is that things that you kind of dislike doing, i.e. being on LinkedIn, which I think we can all agree sucks.
Some people love it.
I mean, do they though? That's what I want to know. Does anyone actually love it? This is controversial, right? But it's all the garbage out there. We know the things, the lying, the self-aggrandizing.
There's so much lying and bragging.
There is so much lying and bragging and BS, and it's all consuming. But I believe that when you do something that feels icky and you're like, oh, I have to do this and it feels icky and I'm going to do it anyway, you don't get great results. And it has something to do with that ickiness that is like, this is not aligned with you and your jam.
I think that's absolutely true. I talked to a consultant a couple of years ago. I've had 2 conversations with consultants that love LinkedIn, like loved it. And, tons of followers, and they post stuff and they get a lot of engagement. And I do believe that love of LinkedIn comes through in their posts. They're living for this stuff. They're working LinkedIn like a job. And I think, if I had that level of enthusiasm, then maybe I would spend more time there too.
Yeah. When it comes to LinkedIn, the stuff I love is, posts that I feel passionate about. They're usually not about messaging. They're about entrepreneurship or life. And when you have real engagement with real people, that feels good. But there's a lot of just noise and, BS in the feed. And also you mentioned that you've really just been focusing on podcasts in your newsletter and speaking, which probably feels easier and more aligned. And now you're kind of busier than ever.
It's been an interesting year so far, but I will say positioning work in general, the beginning of the year is very busy because positioning kind of feels like a Q1 thing, particularly for big companies that do kind of yearly planning cycles. Like Q1's where you're going to get this underpinning stuff figured out, and then, you're going to execute on it the rest of the year. So Q1 is always quite a big quarter for me. But Q2 is shaping up for a big one this year too, which I think is interesting. And I don't know what that says about the market in general. Maybe nothing. I don't know. Like, I will say, when I started podcasting, it didn't look like it was going to be a great channel for me. So it took a long time before I was convinced that podcasting was good. So when I released my book, the first book in 2019, I guessed it on like 300 podcasts. But the problem is like you never know whether anybody's listening to any of these podcasts, right? And it's almost impossible to figure out, like, is there anyone out there or not? And it was very hit and miss. Like some podcasts I do, and I get a lot of calls afterwards. People say, "Oh, I heard you on so and so's podcast," and then the next 10 I do, I get zero calls, like zero, nothing, And then you get one that people are talking about, and so I found that pretty frustrating. I was like, "Well, I wish I could know which ones are good, and I'd just do those, and then not do all the other ones." And then I decided I was going to do my own podcast. And the test I ran was I did it weekly for 6 months.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
The idea was it's going to be the test to see. I'm going to do it weekly for 6 months. And then I'm going to see, do people, when I book meetings, do people say, "Oh, yeah, I heard your podcast"? And I had zero mentions at the end of the 6 months. And my numbers were okay comparatively. And again, it's kind of hard to look at everybody's numbers, but, there's a few things like there's a tool called Listen Notes, and you can go in there and it'll tell you what percentage, so my podcast is sitting there as like top 2% in the land or something. And I'm like, well, that sounds pretty good. And I could look up other people's podcasts and do better than them. So I'm kind of like, okay, well, the reasonable number of people listening, but nobody that I want. And I'm like, well, am I just talking to consultants? Because I knew there's a lot of consultants listening. Anyways, and so I decided I was not going to do it anymore. So I stopped. And then 2 months after I stopped, a guest that I really wanted to have on, who was the CEO of one of the companies that I worked with, circled back to me super late and said, "Oh, hey, sorry, we never made that. I want to do your podcast." And then I was like, "Oh man, am I going to do like a season 2 just because this one guy?" And then I thought about it and I went, "Yeah, I am." But I decided I would not do it weekly. I would do it every second week. And I'd run it for like 6 months or something. And then I would shut it down. And so I did that. And then all of a sudden, everybody started calling me.
Interesting.
And now almost every customer that I talk to says they've listened to my podcast. So it was a weird, slow burn. And I don't understand why or how. But like I say, I get zero people say, "Oh, I read that thing on LinkedIn."
In terms of being a consultant, you inspire so many consultants. I think that's why so many consultants follow you. And what you've done, right? These amazing books that are like classics, and you're just well respected, and you're a woman in tech, smart.
You too, though. Like, I will tell you, I get so many people. I had a call this morning where the guy literally had your book and picked it up and went, "I read this because you mentioned it and it was so good." Like, you must feel good about that book, because I think that book is really making waves.
The book's doing well, and I do have to thank you for being on your podcast. Like, I've been on many podcasts where I've heard nothing. I've never heard anything for any podcast I've been on, but yours.
Oh, I'm glad I'm one of the good ones.
No, you are the good one, April. Anytime you want me to be on your podcast, I'm there.
Yes.
I know we've talked about like the kind of uniqueness of being a consultant, one woman show, if you will, when like the business is you. Like April Dunford is April Dunford, right? And I think there's pros and cons to that. And I just would love to kind of hear, what are your thoughts on what's awesome about it being you, and what's maybe been not so awesome about that?
So at the beginning, I made this decision like with a lot of thought. And I had been coming from working in-house, where I'd been a kind of repeat head of marketing. And I specifically decided I was sick of managing people. And so I thought, you know what I want? I want to just be in charge of my own stuff. And I don't want to have to answer to anybody. I don't want to train anybody. I don't like none of that people stuff. Forget it. I'm just going to be the boss of me, and that's it. So I made that decision really deliberately to just be solo. And so there's been some really great things about that, in that I have complete creative freedom and just the ability to really be me and just do what I want to do without anybody standing around going, "Oh, gee, I don't know about that," Whereas my whole career up until that point, there was this long list of things that I wanted to do that I couldn't convince the CEO to let me do. And so I felt really unshackled. And even in terms of how I could show up in my business, like I was on a thing earlier today and somebody was asking me a question about why didn't I end up at big companies? Because I had mainly worked at small companies when I was in-house. And I remember at a big company where I was very actively discouraged to never be funny.
Did they actually say don't be funny?
I did not get my bonus one year because I told a joke, and it wasn't even a joke. As a funny person, I will tell you it was not a joke. So here's the situation. I'm at this big thing, and it's IBM. There was this thing happening in Vegas, and it was this big customer event. And so there's, we're in the big room with like thousands and thousands of people in the room. And I have this little bit part where I'm going to walk on and do this little thing for like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and then walk off. So they tell me before I go on, they're like, this is very serious event. They're like, no telling jokes. No, this has got to be very straight up thing. So I go out and I'm like, no way, man, no jokes coming out of me. And then I walked on stage, but it was Vegas. And right across the street, Celine Dion was doing the Vegas residency, like across the street. And I'm Canadian and she's Canadian. And so I got to say something at the beginning. So I walked on stage and I said, wow, it's great to be up here. I feel like Celine Dion. In my opinion, that is not a joke, but the whole event was so boring that people laughed.
They were just desperate for a joke.
And when I got off stage, my boss was like, that was uncool, that thing you did. And I was like, what? I didn't even know what I did. And he said, you made that joke. And I was like, it wasn't a joke. I don't know what you call that, a quip.
It's a simile, isn't it?
And then when I got my review, I got docked on my bonus for insubordination.
Okay, wow.
But the point is now I can be exactly as funny as I want to be. Again, I don't want to show up like a clown. Like nobody wants to hire the clown to come in and do their positioning. But at the same time, like having to tamp that down in places that I wasn't allowed to ever say anything was really annoying. And so I loved working for myself for all those reasons.
What's the downside to it that you found?
There's a handful of things like, obviously you can't scale. Like there's a limit to the scale in terms of how many companies you can work with. Like at the beginning, everybody told me, well, you'll never be able to scale the revenue. And I was like, have you seen what I'm charging? Because I don't know. It's been scaling pretty good so far. I'm actually running an experiment right now where I got a guy that I've known for a while and I'm training him to do the thing that I do to see if, I can refer some of my overflow to somebody else, because I have a lot of overflow of companies where they want it right away, but I can't get them in for 3-4 months because I'm really busy, or, my rates have gone up over the years because I'm busy. And sometimes companies come and they can't justify my rates to their board because it's too high. And so I think, well, if I had somebody that was well-trained that I trusted, I could refer that business to them. So I'm running a little experiment right now to see if that works.
We were talking about it in London a couple months ago, and you were talking about maybe running that experiment. So let's talk about what's scary about that, because I know I've experienced that in my own business when you're taking that first step to teach someone to do what you do. Because let's face it, what you do is magic, intuitive. It's you being you. How do you teach someone? And I think what I've learned is there's like an emotional aspect. It's like you can teach people, but can you let go of it? And the fear. So what's come up for you? What did you have to overcome to get to this point where you are finally training someone?
The first thing you got to get over is this idea that they're going to do it exactly like you. Obviously, they're not. They aren't you, and they aren't going to do it exactly like you. And they're going to have their own special thing that they bring to the table, and you got to let them run with that. So that's the first thing. But I think the bigger thing was more that, I had bad experiences in the past with trying to work with other people, that they were just kind of unscrupulous, like they'd say, we're going to do this, and then they turn around and do this, and then you got problems and stuff. And so I really had to find the right person to run the experiment with, and it had to be somebody that I could kind of trust, wasn't going to turn around and try to be my competition 5 minutes later. And that may still happen. I kind of just have to sit with that. Now, part of it is, We had talked at that dinner about like, scarcity mindset versus abundance mindset. Like the reality is there's so much business out there, like so much business out there. There could be 100 people doing what I do and I'd still be booked solid. Like I'm very convinced of that. There's so much business to go around. There is no downside to having a few extra people around that know how to do this stuff, even if we don't work out perfectly together. But that was kind of the big one for me. And then the other thing was just the mechanics of it. I think what people don't pay enough attention to in consulting business is profit margin. So when I'm looking at my business and thinking about, well, I could bring these people on and I could serve way more customers, but now I'm splitting the profit. Like my margins are so high right now. I don't spend any money on anything. And so when you look at my business from an accounting perspective, it's almost all profit, which is crazy. Like a typical agency, if you're running 40% profit, you're doing really well. And meanwhile, I'm looking at this thing and it's like 90.
Your
It's like
accountant's like, "Can you spend a little bit more money on
my
something?"
accountant is always telling me that. Like, why aren't you spending some money on some things? And I'm like what? I don't
Like
know.
what? I
Like,
know. Another computer?
so part of what stopped me from bringing on other people is that it doesn't move the needle on my revenue that much.
It's true.
Like when you sit down and pencil it out and you say, well, okay, I'm going to spend all this time training and whatever, and plus there's this risk and all of this hassle, and then I got to make sure this person is good, so there's reputational risk for me, and I've spent a lot of time building my reputation for delivering amazing stuff and all this stuff, and I'm only getting this. For a long time I looked at that math and said the math just doesn't math for me.
True. But I think when I think about it, it's, "Oh, but then I can do less." That's where I go.
And so at some point, I do want to slow down. And so I do like this idea that I would have some people that are good at this stuff that could step in when I get to the point where I decide I want to slow down and there's too much flying around or whatever, and I don't want to do it. And so I think that is why I'm running that experiment now, is I'm looking into the future a little bit and thinking about, April, you're getting old, right? And at some point, you're going to be like, do you really want to be flying around and doing this stuff and whatever? Particularly in QN when things are really, really busy, I tend to get too much work stacked on top of each other. And so, it'd be nice to have some other people around to say, you know what? Not this one, but I got a guy.
So that dinner that we had in London where I think we talked about everything, we got on the conversation about scarcity and scarcity mindset. So now, of course, you've got an abundance mindset because you've been in the game for such a long time and you've learned.
I think I still gotta work on that.
So what makes you think that?
I used to be really bad at saying no to business. Like at the beginning, I would say yes to everything. And then
Yeah.
I very quickly learned like there is such a thing as a bad client.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine. Quite quickly, though, I got over that. And I was like, okay, I'm going to have to qualify folks and only take the ones that I think are a good fit for me. But then what happens if you have too many that are a good fit for you? Do you take all of them? And I have a very hard time, like, especially if it's, CEO shows up and I like the thing and I think it's interesting. And I'm like, ooh, it'd be really fun to work on this for a little bit and get down into the weeds on this stuff. And sometimes you just kind of click with a CEO and you're like, oh, this would be great. And then they say, well, it's got to happen in Q1. And you're like, oh,
Right.
I'll just squeeze it in there somewhere.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I've done that.
So I think it still shows up as that. I have a hard time, like, I qualify the heck out of clients now, but I have a hard time, like, if I like the vibes of the CEO and I like what they're doing and it sounds like a good fit for me and they don't have any problem with the rates or whatever, but the only problem is timing and they want to have it right away. Like I have to really fight to say, actually, no, I'm booked. The next time you can book me is May and it's May or nothing. And I'm getting better at saying that, but I would not say I'm perfect. I'm still jamming the odd one in at the last minute when I should not be because I'm like, oh, this would be so good. Even though, I'm way ahead on my revenue for the year and I'm whatever, that part I still have to, I'm really struggling with that.
I relate to that. I've done that. I do that. I think I've gotten better recently, but jamming one in, it has to happen now.
What do you do to not jam one in? I'm curious.
So I just set up slots and these are the slots. But I can break my rule and I can jam something in even if I have slots. And I've done that. It was like I gotta say yes to everything, like big brands, like I gotta take this. And I think that does come from a fear. It's like you want to hoard. It's like I can't say no. Like if I say no, then like what if there's no one?
What if next month I'm not busy, or 3 months from now I'm not busy? Or what if that client goes away and then they work with someone else, but they could have worked with me, and then I feel bad and I see the work and I'm like, oh, it could have been me. When?
See, I love it. It's like April Dunford has thought all the things. Any consultants who are listening,
And I'm doing so many things now. Like, you should see how hard I qualify customers now. Like, there's literally this giant list of things.
you just hammer them with questions like,
Well, kind of like, but we usually do this qualifying call, and I'm like, tell me about your stuff. And then if it doesn't come out in that telling, then I've got a handful of things. But they got to be B2B. They got to have a sales team. I mainly do software. I will make some exceptions for services businesses, but only in certain ways. And so they got to look more like a productized service, or else I won't touch them. And very few meet that criteria. They have to be in market and have enough traction for us to have something to grab onto. They have to be taking the project seriously, which is, like sometimes I get approached by the CMO or the chief product officer. And so then we're having a conversation about like, well, is this a real priority for the CEO or is it not? And maybe I need to get on the phone with the CEO and we need to talk about that, because if the CEO doesn't show up, then the thing isn't successful. So there's a long list of things. And then there's the whole, sometimes I'm talking to the CEO, and if it's the CEO, then a lot of what I'm screening for is kind of jerkiness.
personality red flags.
Yeah, like personality red flags is a good way to put it. But like, I had a call with a CEO. I'm based in Toronto, and I had a call with a CEO who's kind of a hot shot CEO of a Canadian company, but didn't they only sell in Canada? So the Canadians know them, but nobody outside of Canada would. But the investor introduced the two of us, and the guy got on a call, and I said, okay, like usually the way I run this call is you kind of tell me about what you're working on and what you're wrestling with, and then I'll tell you how we work, and then we see if there's a fit. And he said, well, we don't really have any problems. My investor just thought it would be a good idea to talk to you. So what I'd really like is for you to just pitch me. And I was like, let's save each other a little bit of time here. Like, let's not. Sometimes you'll get this kind of vendor vibes, like you're the vendor, you pitch me. And if I get a situation with a CEO that kind of doesn't want to admit there's a positioning problem, then I can't fix a problem that you don't think you have. And I'm not here to sell you on the problem. Like, if you don't think you have the problem, like, let's just not. So I have a bunch of filters like that. Any of that stuff, I just say no, because there's lots of business. There's lots of business. I don't have to take any business that looks like that. But my big problem is, I've got this long list of qualifications, but, occasionally, like Q1 every year,
People get through.
and it never fails. I get them all booked up. And then your dream client calls, like the one that you're like, oh, I always wanted to work with those folks, And then they call and you're like, all right, I'm jamming you in there. Every Q1, it's the same thing. I'm like, perfect. The calendar's looking perfect, nicely balanced. Everything's good. And then dream client calls you and says, oh, pretty, please.
I mean, at least what I found with consulting is like, you never get to this point where you're just like, I nailed it. I'm good. We're just running. Everything's good. No issue. Everything stays the same. I feel like things are always changing. There's always things challenging you. There's always things pushing you to kind of like grow or, change how you're doing things. I mean, have you found that too?
Yeah, totally. I don't think anybody ever goes, oh yeah, this thing's just a machine. I can just lean back and, throw wood in the engine or whatever. The one that drives me crazy, this is a complete sidebar, but this idea that the way to solve this problem is to have multiple streams of revenue. Who has ever made that work? So instead of focusing on your business to the point where it's really successful, you're going to half-ass 5 businesses. And then you're going to have this multiple streams of revenue thing. I think this is pretty much always a bad idea. Like, unless you've really nailed one, and then, like you say, you can hire a bunch of people or whatever, and then, maybe sell it or something and then go to the next business. So, what I see out there are these folks that are like, well, I don't want to just be relying on this one stream of revenue. So, I'll have this other stream of revenue. And it's like, yeah, but how do you ever get good at the one stream of revenue if you're only spending half your time on it? And then they'll add a third stream of revenue. I think there's a lot of confused thinking about consulting that I think when you're on the ground and you've actually built something that you're like, yeah, that sounds good. But in reality, I don't think would ever work.
I think it's just a lot of people, on social media selling what they think you should do, which is like, here's my course on how to generate multiple streams of income. And.
One of these streams of income that I think is interesting is books. You can write a book and you'll make money off the book. And I was always kind of interested in that because philosophically, for me, like even though the book does make some money for me, like it's selling reasonable number of copies and there's a little revenue stream there, but I never was trying to optimize book revenue. Like the point of the book was to help me in the consulting business where the real revenue is. So had I tried to optimize book revenue, I would have sold way less books. I was having a conversation with somebody and he's doing a book launch and he said, well, he's going to launch the book on his own website and then he's got all these tiers where you can bundle it with some services or whatever. And I think that's kind of a trendy thing to do right now. So instead of Amazon taking their big cut, you're going to sell it on your own website. But the problem with that is 90% of the planet buys books on Amazon. So you've now eliminated, everybody gets a pack of gum at the convenience store, but you don't want to be in the convenience store because, you don't want to pay the cut to the convenience store. So you're saying, okay, walk 5 blocks more and come get it at my store. And then, maybe you'll get some extra goodies or something. And so what happens is you sell way less books. You make way more money for that month or whatever. And then maybe eventually you put it on Amazon, but you've already blown your brains out on all the best people and all the people that were really excited about your book. They're gone. They bought your book already and paid you more money. And so maybe you made this much instead of this much, but you've kind of killed your long tail of that book really taken off, I think. Because in order for your book to really get some traction, like people have got to get it in their hands and they got to read it. And so now you've had a book launch. Now you're trying to launch again, but it's kind of old news and you've had it before. So you're going to have to reinvigorate this second wave of customers. And then you've kind of killed word of mouth because a lot of people wanted to buy your book, but couldn't figure out how to buy it because they went on Amazon and it wasn't there. So they didn't think it was released yet or something. And so you got to decide what you want out of the book. Like if you want to be an author and make books a revenue stream, then by all means, figure out how to make books a revenue stream. But if you're a consultant and the job of the book is to get you consulting revenue, then what you really want is to get that book out there as widely as you can.
Totally. That's the most important thing. Get it in people's hands. It doesn't even matter. I mean, when I launched my book, I got an email from someone on my newsletter, like a good person, longtime reader, but kind of shaming me for putting an Amazon link and leading with the Amazon link and not other places that it's available. And I had to write back to her and just say, people need access to this book. I can't put 10,000 links. That's only going to speak to the US market and all that. And so, yeah, you see people be like, oh, F the man, I'm going to bypass Amazon. And morally, yeah, I think that would make me feel good. But also, I think it would be kind of, as you say, at the expense of exposure and accessibility for just getting your book in people's hands,
The thing that really sells books is word of mouth. The only way you drive word of mouth is to have people, that really want your book come and get your book and then talk about it. So you got to be careful. You can't just give it away. If you just give it away, then some people, a lot of people will have it, but they won't necessarily read it. So what you need is you need people to get the book, you need them to read the book, and then you need them to tell other people about it. So you got to make it really easy to get. You got to make it easy to get finished the book, and then you got to make it good enough that people want to talk about it. So all these things have to be true. Each of those things is so difficult you'd be doing your book a disservice to say, well, I'm going to remove the book channel that everybody buys books on. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't make the book available other places. Like if you want to get my book, you can get it anywhere. You can walk into your little corner bookstore that's completely independent. They won't have it on the shelf because even if I didn't sell it off Amazon, the bookstore themselves orders books. Just because I don't sell it on Amazon doesn't mean your corner bookstore will put it on the shelf. They don't put anything on the shelf unless somebody comes in and asks for it. They're guessing. What you see on the shelf there is the bookstore's guess of what's going to sell. April Dunford puts out a no book. They don't put it on their shelf until 20 people come and say, where's that April Dunford book? And then they put it on the shelf. But if you want the book, they can order it. So mine's available through Ingram Spark. So I'm in the catalog, meaning if you go to your local bookstore and say, this is the book, they can look it up and they'll order you one in, and you don't have to go to Amazon. Bob's your uncle, you're good. But even though I'm listed in all the other places, because I felt kind of strongly about that, like I don't want it to just be on Amazon. And if you don't want to buy it on Amazon, I want to make it so that you don't have to go there to do it. But if you look at my sales numbers,
They're all Amazon.
it's 95%. You're doing it out of the principle of the thing. It's actually not worth doing. If you didn't care about the principle of the thing, it's kind of not worth doing because it's not much of the sales at all. And then there's all these other things about Amazon, right? Like you don't show up in the searches. There's so many books that don't sell any copies. If you launch a book on Amazon, you need to sell a reasonable number of copies within the first few weeks for Amazon to sort of say, hey, this is one of these books that actually sells.
Real book.
Yeah, it's a real book, so we should show it in searches. Until you hit that, you don't show up in a search even. Like even if people are looking for your stuff, it's actually quite hard to find. And so there's all that kind of stuff, like all technology that you have to kind of play the game a little bit.
What have you learned about writing? Or you as a writer, what is it going to take for you to admit that you're a writer, April? How many best-selling books do you need to publish to finally call yourself a writer?
I do not think I'm a writer, but that does not stop me from writing. I think that's the important thing.
Yeah, if you called yourself a writer, you'd probably find it harder to write.
The big thing is you don't have to be perfect at something to get it done, is the big thing. So it doesn't stop me from writing. But then the other thing is that, because I know I'm not the world's greatest writer or writer at all. Like I hired people and there are a lot of editors had eyes on that book to make sure it didn't sound completely stupid and fix my grammar and all the rest of it. And that's fine. But I think the ideas matter. Yeah, I had a lot of faith in the first book in the ideas because I had worked with a lot of companies on it and I knew the ideas were good. And what I wanted was a book that would do the ideas justice.
Awesome. Well, I think it's done justice and more. So just kind of to close, like I love what you said before about how you were in corporate and they said don't be funny and you weren't able to be you, which is just wild. I love that. I can't get over that. And then here you are, you go out on your own. You are just 100% April. You are unapologetically you. And your superpower is your humor, your personality, the way you speak, your free thinking ideas. And I think that's one of the great things about going out on your own. If you're someone who feels that urge, like, I want to be free to kind of do my own thing, I want to express something, I want to try this. I know that's how I felt. I think that's just a great example of what could be on the other side when you make that leap and really just decide, I'm going to go all in on what I like and I'm going to do it my way and I'm going to figure it out. So with that, is there any kind of advice you would give to someone who's listening, who is thinking, who would love to do that, who's full-time, probably feeling, things that you felt and thinking about maybe, becoming a consultant, but not sure? Like, what advice would you give?
It took me a long time to make the leap to consulting. Like I didn't start consulting, I was 48 years old. So that's a lot of time being in corporate before I made the leap to consulting. And part of that was just practicality. Like I was too broke. consultant. Like, like it takes a while to build a book of business. It takes a while to figure out what your offering is. It takes a while to do all that stuff. So, often when people come and they tell me like, oh, I want to go do my own thing or whatever, but how am I going to do it? Like, I think it's okay to take your time about it. And I think it's okay to do it as a side hustle while you've got your 9 to 5 job, because you need your 9 to 5 job because you need the money and you need your health insurance and you need whatever. And part of the reason why I started so late was because I had kids. And so I needed the kids to be old enough that they weren't little babies and stuff, because that was more my focus when the kids were younger, was that. So by the time I started this thing, my kids were a bit older, they're in high school, they don't need their mommy every day, like, and I could be on the road a little bit and it wasn't the end of the world. So I think it's okay to not be so hard on yourself. Like sometimes I feel like people are reading too much LinkedIn or whatever, and they feel like they should just quit their job and go do the thing that they love and whatever. But it's okay to do that slow. Like it's okay to dip a toe in and take some clients on the side and do it sort of nights and weekends, and then wait till a time when you're financially able to pull the string and do the thing. Like I think a lot of people that I talk to, they're just way too hard on themselves. And it is hard. Like the first couple of years are going to be hard. You're not going to make great money the first couple of years. You'll be figuring out the first couple of years. So you need a buffer.
I love that advice. I think you're right. The LinkedIn's kind of sell like quick fixes or be insanely successful in your first year. And I can't stand when people share how much money they made. I hate those posts, but they're everywhere.
Well, and a lot of it's lies. If you did some back of the envelope math on it, you're like, hang on a second, that doesn't actually no. But if you didn't know, right? If you weren't doing this stuff and you didn't know, you'd be looking at it going, oh my gosh, wow, look at that amazing thing they're doing.
How will I ever do that? Yeah, well, I think that's awesome advice. And I think that's you, April, deeply practical, but like kind, and down to earth. That's really who you are. So I think that's really great advice. And as always, been so much fun talking with you. I could talk for another hour. Thank you so much for being on the show.
All right. Well, thank you for having me.
Hey, my friend, you've been listening to The Emma Stratton Show. If you'd like to follow me in my writing, you can find me on Substack. Thanks again for listening.